So, Carolyn, once again, pleasure to be meeting up with you and speaking with you. And like always, we just kind of have this free-flowing conversation, and certain themes come to the fore. And that's why I named our conversations this or that, depending on what theme comes up organically.
Mhm.
And so I think there's a couple of things in the air, but I'd like to begin by just asking you, what's on your mind and what's kind of coming up to the fore with you at the moment?
Well, here I am in Vermont in autumn, and things are changing. I look out my window and it's a different color every 10 minutes as the leaves change and the air changes. My body at the moment is struggling with a pretty severe case of poison ivy, which, since I'm new to the area and new to poison ivy, this is a first in my life. Um, and it's awful. Oh my goodness, it totally takes over. And what I was given by the local doctor was a steroid, which is in response to the poison in the body. And I'm a virgin to steroids. So here I am under this itchiness, horrendous itchiness, and drugs. So I'm kind of a new person, and it's not comfortable at all. But I also recognize that we're all going through our own versions of this. We're being beset by by the world in a variety of ways, and not knowing how to get used to it, how to live with it. And it shows up emotionally, it shows up psychologically, it shows up financially. Everybody is struggling with some version of, oh my God, I'm not used to this and it hurts. What do I do? So I'm fascinated and horrified also by that. And of course, I want to solve it for everybody. And of course, that's just ridiculous. So that's kind of where I am, is betwixt and between and on a steroid.
Mhm. Well, I'm genuinely sorry to hear that. And poison ivy, I've never had experience of that either. So, no steroids. So, again, it's a state which is foreign to me. But um, it just reminded me actually that when you said that, I had an email correspondence from a contact recently, and they mentioned that they had a friend in the later years, twilight years, who's reliving some childhood trauma and trying to, you know, get to grips with it. And I mentioned that as an anonymous person. But it just kind of like, it seems that a lot of people are having experiences that may trigger something to relive, or what you mentioned, this kind of unaccustomed physical, mental kind of area. And
Hmm.
perhaps this is all going part and parcel with this repositioning of what's going on. I mean, I'm
Hmm.
not saying that your contact with poison ivy is indicative of what the world's going through, but I think it's a kind of symbolic of the
I agree.
idea that a lot of people have been putting uncomfortable situations which perhaps they haven't experienced before, and it's all kind of exploding at the moment.
It is. And it's very exciting, when I think about it. And it's not exciting when I feel it. So, we're being pushed, or I speak for myself, I am being pushed.
Mhm.
And it's both of those things. Then another very interesting thing that's happening to me at the moment is that, I was married for almost 6 decades to the same man who died a few years ago, and have not been partnered since, nor have I particularly been interested. And somebody has fallen in love with me. And so here I am, kind of almost 86, and somebody really, really wants me in his life. So I'm like, whoa, where did that come from? So it's a riot, and it's also very poignant.
Mhm.
Love is poignant. So it's all happening at once at the same time as I'm on a steroid and scratching my poison ivy in the fall on the East Coast of the United States.
I
I
mean,
think it's very funny.
well, I mean, how do you follow that?
I don't know.
I mean, that's quite a combination of having all these impacts. I mean, that's what they are. They're impacts, you know, emotional, bodily, psychological. And it does seem that all these impacts are coming at people all at once. Like before, I think before life to a certain degree was in a certain kind of order. You know, people had their routines and this is, you know, kind of we all bought into a certain kind of ordering. We chose that. And I think it's all kind of dissolving now, and these impacts are rushing in like the damn wall has burst. And this is part of the great discomfort that I think humanity is going through.
Exactly. And it's also the great opportunity. But when you're uncomfortable and you're scared of the water drowning you, you don't see the opportunities, at least right away. So that's, I mean, that's cogent, because that's where I would like to be. I may have to wait for this prednisone to wear off before I can actually do it. But that's where I want to be, in that moment of the walls are changing. And what is my response to it, and how can one think of it in a positive way, because change is obviously necessary, and we don't like to change if we don't have to, but we have to, and it's happening on so many different levels. And I'm not young anymore, which is a good thing for me, but I live in a world where half of us are starting their lives, and I want, you know, I'm a mother, so I want I want to make it I want to make it possible for everyone else. Well, that's my instinct. And I realize it's ridiculous. So all of that at once, plus prednisone on top of it.
I'm sure it's possible. It's like the 99th monkey syndrome. Like if enough, if a few people like yourself can deal with all these impacts and, you know, and have still have like the poignancy of love and the experience of pain and go through it, then it kind of can push along humanity in the same kind of in the way. But actually, I like it when coincidences come together, because literally over lunch today, just a few hours ago, I was just looking at a short YouTube video of an extract from Carlos Castaneda. And I've not looked at Carlos Castaneda for many years. I have read the whole series in my youth. And this short video was an extract from, and it was about the need for change. And Don Juan was saying to Carlos Castaneda, you know, you're not trying hard enough to change. And Castaneda was saying, I'm doing my best. And Don Juan was saying, no, that's an empty phrase. You're not doing your best. You're not pushing hard enough for change. And he said, do you know what your problem is? And Castaneda said, what's my problem? He says, you don't realize that you don't have time.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. It's now or never.
Yeah. It was just so poignant that he said, like, you think you have, you know, you're still relatively young. You think you have a lifetime, but even a lifetime is so little time to change.
Right. 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 Boy. And you don't realize that until you're getting towards the end of it, in my experience. Because, you know, when I'm young, when I was young, the world was all around me and ahead of me. And now I can't pretend that anymore, and or can't even want it anymore. But there is also this instinct to kind of clean up the room before I close the door. And that feels very important to me right now, to clear up my own particular mess, my own particular questions, my own particular rationales, like, who am I? What was I here for? What did I do? What can I still do? How do I complete it? All those kinds of questions at a time when everything is coming apart. And one of the things I wonder a lot about is why, and not why, but how I managed to get born so that toward the end of my life, I would be at this point in human history, because it is also waning down and shifting. We're shifting forms and resisting it with all our might, but that's what is happening, whether we want it to or not.
Mhm.
So, what does that mean in terms of my particular remaining time on Earth and what I feel I'm here to do and want to complete and accomplish in the interest of the whole?
Mm.
I have
I mean,
no answers.
that's one of the reasons why I appreciate these conversations, and I think they're useful, is that uh, your awareness of these issues are very acute because you're very cognizant of your stage in life and you know what you've gone through, and know perhaps you feel with greater awareness the these kind of these burgeoning issues and impacts coming in, whereas a lot of other people like myself and other even younger people will say, "Oh, I have time, you know, things are going to go changing this way and that way." But in fact, I feel that the pressure's there for everybody, but some people are more aware of the stimulus and the pressure. And I feel that you're very aware of these pressure coming in for humanity, for individuals, for people. And other people may be saying, well, yeah, I can feel it, but you know, I don't feel the urgency of it. But I sense there is an urgency for getting good with ourselves, you know,
Yeah,
because what's coming in, we have to be in a good place, because if we're not, we'll get knocked over easier.
right. And also, I think it's important for us to feel that we make a difference. You know, I'm here for a reason, and and I've had all these experiences, and now what? Do I just kind of piffle away, or do I have a statement? Does my life end in this is what I know, and let me put it out there and help in any way I can for you to take on the next stage of it, or however that goes, rather than to just kind of piffle away. Uh, this life force has got to complete its task,
Mhm.
its experience, not task, but experience. So, and that's exciting to me. So, and I like the excitement.
Well, that's a good sign, because it's one kind of response to this discomfort, is that you can see it as pain or exciting, depending of how you want to maneuver with it. But I'm hearing more and more kind of feedback from people that there's discomfort here, there's issues there. Some of it's health, some of it's life circumstances, some of it's uncertainty, economic and job wise. It's like everything's really scrambled now.
It's scrambled,
But of
absolutely.
course, if it's not scrambled, then it can't, if it's not scrambled, it's more difficult to rearrange. So there's there's this life force coming in individually through people, all of us, and
Mhm.
some other force coming in to kind of put pressure on this change. And so and that may be causing discomfort, or I've used a phrase, I'm not sure, you said kind of, was it unaccustomed states?
Mm.
So how do we deal with discomfort and unaccustomed states? Is it excitement?
I think it's fear. More, I mean, you can call it what you want to, but I think we're terrified. And I'm watching from a distance what's happening in my where I come from, which is California. The San Francisco Bay Area is where I lived for half a century. And what's happening in my own town, my own neighborhood right now are gangs, disaffected young people, many of color, who are getting together and riding around in, I don't know whether they have their own cars or stolen cars, with guns and killing people. I mean, it's now nobody is safe walking their dog in the street in the day. You know, it's gotten to that kind of a pass in my old neighborhood. So what I'm so glad I'm not there anymore. But also I'm wondering, who are these? These are young, mostly male people who are clearly desperate, who are using the energy of that desperation to create havoc and fear in others. And what's happening inside their own hearts and souls, who knows?
Mhm.
But they're getting something out of it, some sense of power, or I'm going to get back at you. I don't know, but the fact of it is terrifying. So of course, so what you then have is everybody scared together and acting out in different ways. I see that as what's happening globally and taking a variety of forms, including, of course, at the level of government
Mhm.
and the level of, high economics. That's what we're all doing, is we're in reaction to our own fears and trying to feel like we have some charge of our lives, which we don't. So, how do you respond to that? Other than what I did, which was just get out of there.
Mhm.
But I don't think that you really can get out of there. Because so here I am in this gorgeous place in the country on the other side of the country, but there's no economy here. So people are finding that they can't really stay, that they have to go back to the city to work, to support themselves and their family. So we're in this bind that takes all these different forms. And then what we're doing, and this is, my own body is an example of this, is we take a drug, or we're given a drug. And the drug is worse than the illness.
Mhm.
For me right now, I mean, I'm just sort of kind of all sixes and sevens. So now what? How do I figure it? How do I live today? What do I do tomorrow? How can I help? How can I accept that I cannot help? All of those questions are up.
Mhm. It does seem like maybe maybe all these secondary forms are not getting to the core of the issue. I mean, if people, it's a question of response. If people are responding in gang violence, um, that's maybe somewhere responding, but it's adding fear to other people. I mean, I've been asked before by people. They say, "Where do you recommend I go to?" And I
Mm.
say, "Well, I can't say anything like, because there's no ideal place. But the question is, you know, don't run away from yourself. Whatever you do, don't run away from yourself, because, wherever you go to, you'll take yourself with you. So deal with that first." And so it's, there's kind of, let's say how to put this. It's, uh, I think there's a disconnect going on, and you've mentioned this word disconnect, and we're all trying to deal in our own way with the disconnect. And my kind of concern is that the disconnect goes to a deeper level. It's a disconnect from one's sense of sacredness, contact with something, whether it's source or the divine, or you know, or the vital force, however you define it or want to call it. It's a connection that we have inside, and these responses may be kind of distraction from looking at what is more potent and what is more profound, which is, am I being disconnected by this?
Yeah, that's very wise, and I think it's true. But I think we have to sort of get there in our own way. It's unless you happen to be born with that inclination, or whatever you want to call it, spiritual inclination, to recognize that it's a deeper problem, a deeper issue, and that we have a whole culture that has been avoiding that, and replacing it with organized religion and economy and all this stuff, which is really so shallow. I hope I'm not offending anybody, but it doesn't match the reality, I don't think. So we're being pushed to, we're being stripped, and we have no choice but to feel it. And I happen to be doing this very interesting example of it with prednisone, is I'm being stripped, and I have no choice but to feel really, really uncomfortable. So I think it's, probably no accident that I stepped into poison ivy, and I'm now dealing with steroids, because I had to know what this felt like. Not that I advise anybody to walk into poison ivy, but yes, we are being pushed, and I did it in a very literal way 2 weeks ago when I walked right into a patch of poison ivy. But we can also choose to walk into it, choose to take it on. And what are the various ways of doing it? Well, I know what I do, which is a lot of avoidance normally, and probably many of us avoid the really hard stuff. But the world is handing it to us, like it or not. So it has, I'm just thinking out loud here. It has to do with learning how to accept what the world hands you. Okay, this is what's happening now. In my case, it's, itching like mad and taking these horrible drugs and feeling the effects of that. Okay, can I use it? What is here to learn? What new experience am I having that is actually an important experience? It's for all of us an experience that pushes us to look more deeply. Okay, am I willing to accept that? Yes, I guess so. Now, something like that,
Yeah, it's, as you say, I think it is this kind of stripping back. It's like different between genuine concentrated orange juice and the diluted version, to put it in a very kind of crude way. But it does seem, like you say, that in order to go forward, because I mean, we came to a point, I think, socially, culturally, especially in these developed nations and through globalization, that we were just got to a point of just too much secondary accumulation. Now, I know that a lot of people didn't have goods. I don't mean just physical accumulation, but accumulation of secondary impacts, like outsourcing your dependency or outsourcing your distractions onto superficial entertainments, anything to kind of avoid yourself in a way. And we got to a point where perhaps we were just losing our way. So maybe a way to think about all this discomfort is we're being given by whatever source or whatever kind of overseeing energy, the world is actually giving us a time to kind of get back to ourselves. That's how I feel it. Stripping down, getting back to basics, getting back to what really makes us, makes us human. And it's quite interesting how the contrary to that is a transhuman, is a technology.
really.
And it's like a mirror by saying, well, we're putting this in your face because it's time to question your humanity. This is like your dark night, the dark night of the soul, as it were, to really find out where you want to go, because sooner or later humanity is going to have to go where you choose.
Because we have lived on such a surface level. The American way of life and economy and even democracy is just a play on words. It doesn't go very deep. And we're being forced, I think, to go deep and ask those real questions about, you know, who am I? What do I love? What do I long for? How do I express it from a deep place rather than from a shallow place? You know, all those questions of how does one live? You know, I am a human being. What does that mean? How do I live in this world?
Yeah.
And, you know, it's in a way taken me a lifetime to be able to even ask the question that way. So I'm praying. I'm just praying for the young generations to have the courage and the strength and the imagination to take it on at that deeper level and get away from all of this shallow nonsense, which a lot of our culture is.
And we may need to. It's like before, a person could have a whole human lifetime and not be pressurized into these questions. They may come or they may go. But I think now these questions will, you know, of like what it means to be human and where we go and all, and, you know, these questions and what is superficial and what is profound, what is false, what is the false truths and what are the real truths, you know, are really being pushed into this moment of history. So we don't have a lifetime to deal with these questions. We have this moment. I don't know, but it's being condensed like into a tiny, tiny, really tight moment of history, which is why it's so uncomfortable. And it does feel like, you know, these this time is being condensed now for that. And so this is the discomfort, and this is the maybe the dark night of our soul, as they call it. But to be able to have a distinction between what is not necessary, what is superficial, what is not true, because now people are realizing that the politicians are talking lies, the propaganda is talking rubbish, and so it's kind of revealing itself. So we could say that this is the time of the great revelation.
It is the time of the great something. And I just want to acknowledge just how brilliant you are. You take all of this stuff that I throw out, and then you wrap it gorgeously and catch the essence and speak it simply. That takes
just
great
juggling.
talent. You're a good juggler. Anyhow, I appreciate it. Yeah, I think this is a moment, and whether we're going to be able to meet it and respond appropriately or not is a question. I'm not 100% convinced we're going to do it. However, if I can do anything to help kick it into that kind of line in the bowling alley, I'd like to be able to do that.
Which I feel that you probably felt that in the back of your mind. You've been doing that throughout your life to some degree anyway.
I think so. Yeah. I think it's what I was born for.
So Carolyn, I mean, you just said that I think it's true that there's underlying feeling that, you know, you are here to work on these issues, and I think we're all here for something. Maybe these I can call them compelling times, but the kind of discomforting times. Also, the advantage is they can make us try to ask the questions for ourselves. What am I really here for? And perhaps it's a time of soul searching. I mean, I use this analogy, the dark night of the soul. It's kind of a religious analogy, but it's like the darkness that you go through to learn about yourself, to find your soul. But you need that night of the dark night of the soul, that discomfort before getting there. So perhaps there is this deep purpose for what we're going through, despite all the suffering and deaths and people leaving us at this time, and the corruption and the, you know, all the baddies out there doing the bad thing they're trying to do to us mere mortals. It could be for a profound benefit for the human soul, individually and collectively.
I hope so. I think so. I mean, I don't think that we can do it without it
Mm.
because, it's scary. And people are not likely, I am not likely to choose to be terrified in order to enhance my soul. It's not going to come up in an ordinary day. And so we have to be kicked in the butt.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, I wish that weren't necessary, but it is in my experience. I move when something compels me to. Now, it doesn't always have to be negative. I also have had the experience of the sky suddenly opening up and seeing the nature of the universe when I least expect it. But more often than not, it's when I'm uncomfortable, when something has really kicked, and our times are doing it to all of us, like it or not. We are having to question uh, the, the realities that we are fed about the nature of reality, about food, about what to do with the natural world, about whether money makes any sense, the way it's being practiced, about who is strong and who is weak, all of those, or even what is beautiful and what is not. So it's up, and not a moment too soon, I think. Because if we don't have to ask those questions, then we're stuck in the old rut.
Hmm.
And we're being pushed to not be stuck in that old rut, whether we want to be or not. So, in my case, right this minute, it's the poison ivy plant.
Hmm. Yeah, and I mean, I like that phrase you used. It's I move when I'm compelled to move, and I
Mm,
think that is probably indicative for all of us. We tend not to realize how we don't do things,
right, right,
and then when we're compelled, we get to realize how we haven't done so many things.
right.
It's like going back to that Don Juan Castaneda quote. Like, Don Juan said, "You are not making the effort to change." And Castaneda says, "I'm doing my best." And he said, "No, you're not. That's just an empty phrase."
Mhm.
So, yeah, where would we be in the future if we were not compelled at this moment to make these changes? Would be exactly perhaps where we're going in the previous direction, which was superficial, not questioning. And I think that perhaps now, as you say, we are going to start questioning the other big questions. What is reality? What is the
Mm,
nature of consciousness and love and human beingness? Everything's up for grabs.
Everything's up for grabs. And I also think that as you speak of we, um, that that has to be parsed. There's many different we's. Um, and those who do take this kind of stuff on are not necessarily everyone at any given moment.
Mhm.
So there are those, and again, Lin-Manuel Miranda is my example of the moment of a new force in the world, a new level of intelligence, a new imagination. And he does not represent that many people. There aren't that many of that level of insight and brilliance and talent and compellingness, interior compellingness. But what I'm observing and hoping I'm not making it up is that more and more of them are appearing on the planet in the younger generation.
Mhm.
And that my generation, you are still part of the younger generation, but my generation is on its way out, and we've been, we've been whatever we've been, but I would say not all that significant in terms of change. but I think there's just new people being born, and they've got there's something different, and that's where the hope is, and that's where I want to put my my assistance.
So what about this other area? Because you're right in that it's always been the minority of people who have kind of gone with these early waves, or understood, or listened to these signs, and listened to themselves. I always think it's more people than I always think. Oh, there's this we is bigger, because maybe I'm speaking with a lot of like-minded people. But then, you know, when I go out in the world and I see people in the local cities and the local streets, I'm thinking like, you know, that's a different world. So it's still a minority. It's an important minority, and it's a growing minority. But what about the rest of the people who are feeling discomfort, not really asking questions about why or how can they respond to it? Are they going to feel greater and greater discomfort? Are they going to be able to push through this dark night, do you think?
Who knows? I think some will, some won't, which is true of just about anything. I don't know. I don't know whether the level of desperation has to be a certain intensity in order for it to happen. I don't know whether you need more of these geniuses with big hearts. I, you know, what I'm focusing on right now is Hamilton, and, you know, and that whole group of young people. So that community was the outside community. It's a community of color. Those are not, you know, not your white middle class people. And so I believe, and I've always felt this way, that that's where it would come from. Those who are kind of under the radar and not taken into consideration as being part, you know, they're a problem, but they're not really part of the citizenry. And what this is so different with is that they are not only becoming part of the citizenry, but they are stars, and showing what they are, what not only what they're capable of, but also the depth of their perception of all of us. I mean, it's stunning, and it's new. So that's what I'm looking at, and comparing it to my own experience as a white, you know, growing up sort of poor and middle class in a big American city, from refugees, and Jewish refugees, which meant that we weren't really the, you know, the salt of the earth. We weren't who, like, we couldn't get elected president of the United States, but still we could disappear in a crowd. And these new generations don't disappear in a crowd. They can't, and they don't even want to. Why should they want to? But they finally are having power on the level of the expressive arts. And we are all getting to see the level of their insight and brilliance and abilities and positivity and strength, and we're thrilled by it. It's that thrilledness that I'm very aware of and watching. Like, people would that's overstating it. People would go to great lengths to get a ticket to see this show. So it's an amazing phenomenon. And this is just one particular expression of it, for right now. But it indicates a major change. And I would like to live long enough to sort of see in what direction that change goes.
Definitely. So, I mean, you said it's like a new phenomenon. I think what you're saying is like it's a new phenomenon to be coming out and having that stage, that platform to to kind of really come out into society, because the marginalized or the outsiders, and I grew up loving the book by Colin Wilson, The Outsider. The outsiders, I felt, always had heightened senses, because they were always living in circumstances which there was more immediacy, or less comfort. So the perceptions were sharpened, but they were always marginalized. But now, of course, I feel that these heightened perceptions are poking through the fat belly of our lazy societies. And I think a lot of this kind of mainstream blandness is lacking heightened perceptions, or recognizing these inputs. And I think these our programmed societies with their bland entertainment, the culture industries, the everything on tap consumerism, has made so many people kind of lazy, and has numbed our senses and our perceptions. And then you get the outsiders, or those marginalized, or those people who have always had sharpened perceptions, because they weren't always in this blandness of the belly of society. And maybe now, it's the time for these sharpened perceptions to come through.
Yeah, and they are.
Mm-hmm.
And it's, everybody wants a piece of the pie. It's fascinating to watch, but also frightening, because I fear for their safety. The forces, the sort of economic and political forces that want to have control of this whole thing are a powerful band. And they've got money up the wazoo, which they don't have any idea what to do with. And they're crazy. I mean, there's real insanity in that aspect of society, which may be what brings them down. I mean, this may be a very natural progression. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And, I keep asking myself the question is, what made me come onto the planet at this particular time in history? Am I here for a reason? Is what I have to offer important? Because I do have a point of view that's unusual.
Mm-hmm.
And, if I was asked to explain what it is, I would be able to do that. But I really see that we've been living in a miasma of not of our own making,
Mm-hmm.
but one that has been created to keep us in that miasma. And everything I've been about in this life is trying to clear that mirror.
Interesting word, miasma. Haven't heard that for a while. I like it. And you've spent your whole life in the US, in America, and there's extreme polarities in America, extreme fragmentation going on, and extreme political polarizations. I mean, just to talk about the US going into 2024 will be a whole series of talks, which we probably don't need to do because it's too political. But so you talk about maybe these elites or these high-ranking people with their money, and that coming to a fall. This is part of the change. And sometimes I consider we're seeing all this dirty laundry coming out, especially from those in power and higher positions, perhaps because it's time for their fall.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes things become more visible, like the drowning person. They're making the most noise, the most flapping about, because they know they're going down.
Yeah.
So maybe all this miasma and these moneyed kind of groups that are trying to maintain these false status hierarchies, maybe they're coming to their big fall, and that's part of the change. But we all have to feel discomfort because we're all shifting. Do you feel they're going to come to a fall?
Yes, no, maybe so. I don't know. And I'm not even sure that that's the way I would, if I were God,
Mm-hmm.
how I would organize it. because ultimately we all have to make it. It can't be just some of us. And what making it means is, we can talk about that. I don't know. But it's not a matter of vanquishing the foe, because we're all in this together. So it's all about, ultimately, it's about evolving. And that means, again, all of us or none of us. So how does that happen? Short of having another war, killing off the baddies, making more prisons, which makes more money for the entrepreneurs who like to make prisons. How do we get out of that cycle without doing it by murder? That's the only way we've known how to do it in recorded history.
Mm-hmm.
That won't work. That doesn't do it. That's just more of the same. So it's very subtle, and it's got many levels. And how do you have the intelligence, the sensitivity, and the broad seeingness enough to handle the issue with deep intelligence and subtlety? That's a toughie.
Mm-hmm. That is a toughie.
But there are, these amazing new people who are being born. However, as they grow up, what we are experiencing is these new people's difficulty in having their nervous systems collaborate with the nervous system on the planet. So we have what we are calling on the spectrum. And all these people who are brilliant, but not quite, they're not locked in to a frequency. I hope that that's just a generational thing, but I see it all around me. And our best and our brightest are also our most awkward in what I'm observing everywhere, including my own family and everybody else's family. So I'm like, oh, I didn't count on this. How do we do this now? I don't know. Being alive on this planet is taking on a huge responsibility. And I don't know, I've gotten to this age and I have no answers at all.
Well, maybe no answers, but a lot of thought-provoking ideas. I mean, I think it's important what you said is that vanquishing your foe, waiting for them to fall, is just the old way of thinking. And that's how the old patterns have always happened, because even in all revolutions, those parties who took the position of the vanquished finally ended up behaving like the old regime and just perpetuated it, the patterns. And so, as you said, this is the old idea of succession, is that those in power will pass it on to their lineage, and they will continue it. And so it's not about vanquishing them, because then you get into the energetic entanglement of fighting and struggling, which means you all get brought down to the same energetic level. But yes, it could be a lot more subtle. It could be that the idea of succession will be passed over, but the people who receive it will be wired differently. And although they may start to act out the same patterns, they feel something different. And within a generation, and especially another generation, we're completely different receptors. The human being is a different receptor. We just can't play out the same patterns anymore.
Right. So what is that going to look like? And that frustration has been built in. And when you're frustrated, you look for a fall guy. So there you are, back in the street fight. I don't know. We humans are a very funny animal. And we're being faced, I think, with huge dilemmas. which it's time for it.
Mhm.
And I'm really curious to know how we are going to make our way through this without falling back in the old ways of making an enemy that then you spend all your strength and money in building machines that will do them in one way or another.
And what will it look like? It will look like a longer time than perhaps many of us are anticipating, because if it's 1 or 2 generations, and I won't be around either to see that. So perhaps the short-term goals, which a lot of our society and groupings are based on short-term goals, is to take advantage of what's happening now. That's the control, that's the struggle, that's the contestation of forces. But the long term, which takes time, is much more subtle. And that's going to come up naturally anyway. So the thing is, we're going to have to go through all the chaos of the short-term goal groups fighting it out. Whereas the long-term development of humanity is going to come through anyway, but it's going to come through this mess on the surface while short-term goal people are struggling, perhaps.
Well, and that's on the level of humankind, but there's also the planet. And the the short term includes the destruction of the planet because of the way our whole economic system works. And we don't have that kind of time. So I wonder what it will take, what has to happen for us to be shocked.
More shocked than we already are.
More shocked than we are.
Mm-hmm.
And the earth itself may take care of that. And I think it's doing it in various ways as we have this climate, what we call disasters, which many of which I think were pretty much created by our practices. But we can't live without the natural world, even though we don't realize that. And we are coming to a point of perhaps no return. So if that happens, then what happens? So what I look at is history and ancient stories of the whole thing taking a rest. Humans going into the ocean of milk, mm-hmm. and then just resting, which I don't think is unrealistic. In fact, mm-hmm. Who knows? I probably will not be around to see that, but we'll be watching from wherever I find myself in a different form.
Yeah, I think a lot of these government and international higher than government groups are already thinking the same thing you are, because they have these underground cities all over the planet, and each government have their underground cities in each country. So they're probably thinking, if it hits the fan and it does come to that, they want to go down and wait it out. But that's the last thing we want. These people coming up after X amount of years thinking that they're the prodigy for the future.
Well, except they forget that they're going to die in the meantime.
Mm-hmm. So. Yeah. Even best laid plans can go to waste, because if you don't have the inner genuine intention and connection, mm-hmm. My own belief or sense is that you get found out eventually, and I do feel that it's the planet understands certain alignments of energy and frequency, and you can't escape from yourself. You can't hide the genuine frequency of where you're coming from.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and yes, and human life is only so long, mm-hmm. and it has its own parameters, and we can't go beyond that. And we can create all these machines, but so what? Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, wisdom is hard won, I suppose. And this is fascinating. I worry about the young ones who are here to take it on, I think. But so many of them are the ones that who I'm meeting are what we call on that spectrum. And I don't, I hope they're able to, I hope they're able to survive, but I'm not entirely convinced that they are. Or the ones that who I'm acquainted with are brilliant, but lacking in some basic ways. I don't know, and I figure I'm one of them, and I am smart, and I am lacking in multiple ways.
Well, we're all lacking in different aspects, but I think you're right. Wisdom is hard won, and perhaps this, you know, the younger generations will have to find their way, and maybe these, as we talked about, this condensation and concentration of forces will push people to make it, or not, to be quite practical and honest. But it's the times we're in, and we have to be adaptable and aware and respond appropriately to these forces, and that's for everybody, every age strata, and whatever spectrum you're on. We have to it depends on how we respond appropriately or not. And that's the as you called it, the kind of discomfort of our state.
Yeah, but it's also, I realize, the evolution of consciousness, that consciousness does evolve under stress. If it doesn't have to, we just rest. But we are needing that, exactly the push we're getting. So let's see how we react to that. Whether we hide in fear, try and kill each other, or in fact climb above it and find the others who have that kind of imagination to do it with.
Yeah, and to finish with Don Juan's words when he said to Castaneda, "No, you're not doing your best, not yet." So, so we still have more to go. It's been a fascinating conversation, Carolyn, and again, a pleasure. So, so thank you for, I think, sharing your experiences and being honest. And I think at the end of it all, despite all these uncomfortable impacts, I think there has to be hope, because that's evolution.
That's evolution. Right. That's right. And I would put it even, there has to be evolution because that's the way the world goes, and therefore there is hope.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, my friend.